In the next hour, we just move to another presentation on research. Yesterday we had, as you remember, a short introduction to auction and experiment, and the plan for today is just to go into details of an experiment on auctions. What we do in this paper, what is the aim of this paper? We run an experiment to study how to design incentive to foster innovation, which are bought through public procurement contracts. And in particular, what we do, we just try to mimic two relevant phases of innovation. The first phase is motivating research investment to design an innovative project. So you think about how innovation comes. There is someone which is investing effort in trying to find some innovative elements. So this is the first phase. And the second phase, we mimic it with the experiment, is implementing, how to implement this innovation efficiently, which in our setting means who has to develop the innovation, and efficiently means who is the most efficient firm in doing. So to find out this most efficient firm in doing the innovative project, we will use a first prize auction. And what we want to investigate is if to give bid preferences in this first prize auction to the one which has which has started the innovation, give some incentive in the first phase, so to increase investment in innovation. So what I'm going to do now, I will first provide you some motivation about this research aim. Then I will move very shortly to the literature. We will see in detail the experimental design, the theoretical prediction, and results and some conclusion. So I think it is not here the place where I should spend too much time in saying the relationship between innovation and market failure. And there is all the literature we know very well from Arrow 1962 about the fact that innovation should be somehow supported because of this market failure which can come and could be related to all these different elements. But what it is important to me is this recent paper by Bloom, which is an empirical one, and highlight that there is a decline in the recent period in firm productivity. And obviously this kind of elements call for further for innovation, just to move up this productivity again. We also have a motivation. The other part of which motivates this paper is not only this general and well-known theory about, but it is also the situation in which Europe is at this time. We have a target, what is called the Europe target, 2020 target, about to reach investment in research and development of 3% of the European GDP. Why this? Because we are somehow with a quite large productivity gap with respect to Japan and US, and also because there are, as I also referred yesterday, some challenges in climate change, in energy efficiency, environmental policies, which really call for new technologies. This is just from the Eurostat, and unfortunately is until 2016, but it's just to show you that this is Japan, and it is the percentage of research and development in gross domestic expenditure on research and development relative to GDP. This is for Japan, this is for the US, and the yellow here is China, and the dark blue is Europe. As you can see, we are moving, and as a European, we are moving a little bit with a positive trend, but we are still distant from the Japan and the US. And moreover, here you have the European Innovation Scoreboard 2018, and you can see that there are the dark green are innovator leaders, which are in the north part of Europe. Then you have strong innovators in the center somehow, moderate innovator and modest innovator, which are close to the orange. What does it mean? Having all this heterogeneity in research and development, investment, and so in innovation, there is really a lot of room to improve innovation, and this is something that should be taken into consideration. What about public policies in this aim to somehow foster innovation? Traditionally, we had what we call supply-side policy, which mainly relate to subsidies, prices, grants, and tax credit. So all these elements, I'm sure that you could refer to some example. Horizon 2020, we are all maybe interested in, is a sort of grant which is largely moving towards this incentive for innovation through the research. So they are giving money to do new research. Recently, we have this demand-side policy, which very much relates to policy report Koch and HAO and the European Procurement Directive, in which what they stress that not only supply policies could be relevant to foster innovation, but we have to also develop some demand-side policy, mainly related to public procurement. Why? Because public procurement, as we know, it's a large part of the GDP in each country, and so these public resources could also be used to foster innovation. And following this kind of somehow suggestion, we have this that in Europe they try to develop some contractual form like innovation partnership and pre-commercial procurement, just to foster this kind of aim. What is relevant is that in a recent publication by the OECD, it seems that about 80% of ACD countries are moving towards this kind of demand-side policy. They are trying to implement this kind of demand-side policy. Now, why public procurement? Very shortly, here we have some example about what public procurement did in the past, mainly referring to the US. Internet comes from some sort of public procurement project, the same for PC and processors. And moreover, in the 70s and 80s, we have that the IT revolution has been really stimulated by public procurement again in the US. So we have a lot of elements which really somehow support demand policy through public procurement in implementing larger investment in research and development. But what is somehow the issue is that, as we know, public procurement is a very regulated process, and so it has very specific rules, and so this could be really an obstacle in designing this kind of incentives. So the question of the paper is how we should procure innovation, and should we use what we call bid preference in a scheme in this aim. What we know is that these bid preference schemes are widespread in unsolicited proposal and project financing. So the question is, could we also adopt this kind of bid preferences in research and development procurement, or to foster this kind of process? From a very simple from a very simple consideration on this kind of adoption, we think that bid preferences in a first price auction, which will award this kind of contract to the most efficient firm, should bring positive effect. But the problem is that it is difficult to have real data to test if this bid preference mechanism could work in the right direction or not. And this is exactly because every sector is very much regulated. You can have a very different element related to firms, and you do not have information about cost, about capacity, whatever. So what we thought is really to go through this experimental approach and test somehow mechanism in which you have bid preference and you have not. Okay, this is the simple idea. Another motivation of the experiment is that in the real world you can have what it is called a selection into treatment effect. Why? Because you could have that firms themselves, that they enter in mechanism with bid preference, they take into account since the very beginning the fact that there could be this bid preference. And so if you want to test the effect of having this bid preference, somehow this is not possible because of this starting point from the firm and what you can then have in the data. Differently, an experiment can isolate this causal effect of the bid preference, and we have indeed that in our experiment, firms which are subjects, so who will play the role of the firms, do not know the production cost when they are choosing in the first stage the investment for the innovation. Okay? Now, what we do, we design a lab experiment which is a 2x2 dimension. In which way? We have a treatment which is procurement and a treatment which is unsolicited. In a while I will explain what does it mean. And the other two elements, which the other two dimension is the presence of bid preferences and the absence of bid preference. Just to give you the idea where we want to go, the very short presentation of the results. We have that bid preference increases research investment and increases buyer surplus and welfare in general, welfare. What we got is also are also some puzzling results. Why? Because we found that bid preference does not affect the winning bid. Moreover, being innovator increases bid even without the bid preference, and producer welfare is lower than what it is theoretically predicted. And obviously we went through these puzzling results, and our main explanation, but we are still looking for other suggestions, so if you have they are very welcome. Our main explanation is that these results are somehow related to what is called in the experimental literature a sunk cost bias. Okay? You will see in a while, but just to anticipate, the sunk cost bias is just the way in which someone is having a cost, and in a second period this cost should not affect further decision because it's something that is sunk, while you find that the decision in the second period are somehow affected by this sunk cost which has been done in the first one. Now, a very short reference to the literature on procurement and innovation. We have that in the past there are a bunch of papers which they somehow support the role of public procurement in boosting innovation. They are both theory and empirical papers, or also descriptive ones. But on the other hand, we have other papers that they criticize the fact that public procurement could really move in this direction. Why? Because, as I mentioned before, there is too much regulation, public procurement is a complex project, there is a lot of uncertainty, and so on and so forth. So you see there is this somehow contrasting position in the literature. Then we have some recent studies we think we contribute to with this experiment, in which they investigate specific mechanisms which are in this public procurement setting to foster innovation. And finally, we have some recent empirical evidence on how to foster innovation, mainly related to case studies, with the exception with respect to the Carolis, which is investigating some form of incentive in public procurement in the US, and they have an empirical investigation. Also, this one is empirical, but I do not have time to discuss too much. Let's go to present the experiment in details. So, this is the usual slide you have just to start presenting the experiment. First, treatments. We have 3 sessions, 24 subjects per session. And they play 15 periods, you will see in which way, with the 2 stages, okay? And they are, somehow they play in pairs, which are randomly rematched within a subgroup of 6 subjects. So we have 12 independent observations for treatment. This is just a way to increase the observation. If you want, we can discuss in detail. Then we have that the earnings of this subject are expressed in point, and every point at the end of the experiment is as a conversion in euro at a fixed rate, so they gain money. So subject at the end of the experiment will go out with some money in their pocket. We use Z3, and we ran this experiment last year in May in Bocconi lab. And they had an average earning of about 15 euros. They played on average 75 minutes. And what is really relevant is that they had a sort of initial endowment of 180 points. And this is relevant because they have to use these points, so this endowment, initial endowments, to decide the investment in the first stage. Now, let's go for the experimental design. As I told you, we have 2 producers, so the subject will play like a producer, and we have 2 stages, okay? In the first stage, obviously all these subjects, they will read at the very beginning of the experiment instructions, so they know what they will do, okay? So you enter the lab, you read all together the instruction. If you have questions, you can privately ask, and then you start playing. What do you start playing? You play the first stage, in which you have to decide the research investment, and in this case, you will have 2 different treatments. You can be in a procurement setting, procurement of innovation setting, or you can be in the unsolicited setting, and we will see in a while what does it mean. Then, when the first stage is ended, you move with the same pair on which you play to the second stage, in which you have the first prize procurement auction, in which could be with bid preference or without bid preference. So these 2 stages, as I told at the very beginning of this presentation, they mimic this investment in innovation. Investment, and then how to implement the investment. Why we use the first prize procurement auction? Because we want to pick the most efficient firm which will develop the research investment that we decided in stage 1. Okay? Just to refer to what they see, this subject will see in the instruction. So in the first stage, they have to do this simultaneous choice about the investment, which should be, they should pick one number in between 0 and 24. So 0, 24 are the possible level of investment, okay? And they know that this investment is costly, and it has this quadratic function, okay? which is given by this simple number. Usually in the experiment, you do not provide formulas. You just give this sort of very simple number, eventually with some example, just to show how it works. Okay? Subjects are not interested in formulas. They are interested on how they can decide and how this could impact on their decision. So what is really then relevant is that and the subject they know, their choice as investor will determine the buyer value of the innovation. In which way? You have that the value of the innovation is given by this formula, which is 600 plus 10, which is multiplying the choice of investment, okay? And having a level of investment which is in between 0 and 24, and this formula which determines the buyer value, you can have that the value for the buyer could be in between 600 when the investor will choose 0 investment level, and 840 when the investor will choose the maximum amount, which is 24. Okay? So this is the range of the buyer value. Then we have that in the second stage, at the end of the first stage, the investor will be chosen accordingly to the treatment. If you are in the procurement of innovation treatment, the one which has done the highest investment will be the innovator. If we are in the unsolicited proposal, there is a sort of random pick of one of the two level of investment, which has been done by the subject. So in the second stage, once the investor has been decided, you have that every one of the two players has assigned a production cost, CP, which is in between 0 and 550 in step of 50. So it could be that you get 150 as production cost, or 250, whatever. You have 12 possible, somehow you face 12 possible production costs, and this is randomly assigned. At the same time, once they see this cost, and they know who is the investor, the bidders will choose simultaneously the bid for the execution of this innovation. And we are, as we saw yesterday, in a first prize auction, but it is a procurement one, so it is that the lowest one will win the auction, okay? While if you are in a direct auction, obviously it is the highest one, but we are in procurement. And so the payoff from auction, as we saw yesterday, okay, in my wrong formula, if you remember, now is for the buyer, it is for the bidder, so for the subject, and the winner between the two will get the bid, which is the price the buyer has to pay, minus this production cost, which has been assigned before, okay? While for the loser, there will be a 0 payoff. And finally, this is the last step, just to mimic the real world, we have that after the auction has been played, there could be a probability that the auction is revoked. Why? Because you are in a setting in which there is this innovation, the mayor of a town has to decide if to procure the innovation or not, so it goes for all this kind of process, whatever, but at a certain point, very close to the end, he realized that it is not what he wants to buy, and so he just closed the process. So we want to mimic this, and you see all this part, it is equal to 0 if the initial investment is 24. And this means that the probability that the auction is revoked is equal to 0 if they do the highest investment. So the lowest is in another way, the lowest is the investment in innovation, and the higher is the probability that the auction is revoked, so the project is not implemented and bought by the buyer. Okay. Now, the treatments, as I told you, are 4. And we have a treatment in which we have the unsolicited proposal with the bid preference that we shortly call bonus, and the procurement of innovation with the bid preference. So in the unsolicited proposal, you have that the innovator in stage 1, once they, the two in the couple, they did the choice about the investment in innovation, one is chosen as innovator in a random way, okay? And only, this is important, only the innovator will bear the cost of the innovation, okay? Then you have that being in the bonus treatment, during the auction, the innovator will have a bid preference. What does it mean, this preference? It means that the bid of the other in the auction is multiplied by a factor which is 1.5. So it is a way just to give an advantage to the innovator, okay? This is something that is really done in the real world. For instance, when you want to give a bid preference to a small firm in a normal auction. It is applied in some procurement in the US. You just want to give some form of advantage to the small firm, and you just say that they have to bid to the auction together with the large, medium firms, whatever, but the bid of the larger and medium will be multiplied by a sort of factor so that you give an advantage to the small in the competition process when you evaluate the bids. Note that this factor, so this theta, is only used to compare bid and it does not enter in the payoff expression. Okay? It is just used to give this advantage and to determine the winner. When you have the treatment BP, which is bonus and procurement of innovation, what is different? It is different with respect to these two steps. So the role of innovator in procurement of innovation is assigned to the guy in the couple which has done the highest investment, while before it was randomly chosen. Okay? And moreover, both the innovator and the competitor in the procurement of innovation, they bear the cost of they bear the investment cost in innovation. The other two elements, that is the bid preference for who will be the innovator according to this different setting, they are exactly the same. So you have this factor which gives an advantage to the innovator over the competitor. And this is with respect to the treatments with the bonus, so with bid preferences. Then we have the two treatments in which there is no bid preference, which are exactly the same with respect to the unsolicited proposal as we saw before. The only point is that the last two steps with respect to the theta obviously are not present. And this is the same for the bonus, for the procurement of innovation treatments. Okay, do you have any question about this, all this bunch of information on the...
I just want to clarify.
Yes?
Do bidders know about costs of investments before making decision about investments? So, and
it seems a little bit, could you repeat again?
Because so the question is, I'm interested, do bidders know about cost of yes. investment?
The quadratic form on how much it costs to invest 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 24, yes, they have this. And I will show in a while how what they see. So since yesterday I discussed with some of you, and it seems that you are not you're not really expert in experiment. I just included these two slides about what the subject will see in doing the experiment. I'm sorry they are in Italian and I didn't have time to translate, but this is after the subject enter the lab. We read the instruction. Usually it is 1-2 pages, cannot be more. Okay, so We read all together, so the 24 subjects in the lab, we read all together these 2 pages of instruction. If there are questions, we move to answer privately, okay? And then they have some trials, and then the experiment starts with the 15 periods, as I mentioned before. And the experiment cannot start before everyone has replied in the correct way to the trials, okay? So just to be clear. So this is the first screen when they start. So you see period 1. This is the timing you have to reply, and obviously is moving down. Then you have step 1. You have to decide the investment, choice of investment. And you have an investment which should be between 0 and 24. You put here your number, and this is a simulator, okay? So you click here, and you have the cost of investment, just to reply to Gegam. So you have even not to calculate by yourself because it appears here. And below, this is the value which is related to your investment choice and the value for the buyer, okay? So if you remember, the value of the innovation for the buyer is related to the level of innovation, okay? So this is exactly what in the first screen they will decide, so in the first phase, and what they will see. In the second screen, we are still in period 1. They know what time they have to do this choice. What they see? Right, this is a sort of, this is a part in which they just have all the information about the previous step. Okay, so this guy has decided to put an investment of 12. Okay, so you did in the previous, so you did in the previous phase, and this was a treatment in which in which it was a procurement of innovation treatment, and you did the highest investment. So you are the innovator, okay, investitore innovator. And you will pay this cost of investment, okay? The public buyer will have this value with respect to this innovation, which is 720, accordingly to the formula we have seen before. Now, in step 2, so in this second phase, you have to decide which is the bid, so which is the price you want to have to perform this innovation, okay? And given that you have a cost, production cost, or a cost to transfer this innovation, which is equal to 400. This is something that has been randomly extracted in between 0 and 550, if you remember, okay? And if you put, for instance, here a price which is in between 0 and the value, because obviously your bid cannot be higher than the value of the buyer, okay? Because the buyer is not interested in paying more than his value. So let's say that you put here 700 or 550, then you click here, and you have, here is written that you will win the auction if the other bidder will choose a price which is higher than. The two are in competition, so you can see accordingly to your data what is the price which will make you the winner in this auction. Then here you have the difference between the price you choose and the cost of transferring the object. And then you have your gains if you win the auction and the auction is not revoked. And this is the amount of gains in the period if you do not win the auction and if the auction is revoked. Okay, so you see all this information are just on the screen. Other question about how the experiment has been designed and the screenshot and whatever? Okay, so we just move to the theoretical consideration. I would say that somehow this is a quite complex design, okay? But you will see that the subjects, they understood very well the design, and I will show you why. But before, let me just briefly refer to the theoretical prediction in stage 1. So what we have to show here is what the theory could predict with respect to the setting that we mimic with the experiment. So we assume that we are under risk neutrality and having bid preferences, so having the bonus, this will stimulate innovation. In which way? In the setting of unsolicited proposal with bonus, you will have a higher investment with respect to the setting of unsolicited proposal and no bonus. And similarly, you will have a higher investment in the setting of procurement of innovation with bonus with respect to the setting in which you have procurement of innovation and not bonus. You can see that in the treatment with the unsolicited proposal, we have unique and symmetric Nash equilibrium in pure strategies, and having simulation with all the numbers of our experiment, because have you seen that they have to choose numbers, we can see that this unique symmetric equilibrium in Nash equilibrium in the unsolicited proposal with bonus is equal to 18, while in the same treatment without the bonus is equal to 12. Okay, so this means that you see the investment is higher in presence of the bid preference. When we move to the procurement of innovation treatments, we have that in the case of no bonus, we have a symmetric Nash equilibrium in pure strategies, which says that one bidder will invest 0 and the other will invest 12, as in this treatment above. The problem obviously will be related to coordination. And the last one, which is the procurement of innovation with bonus, we have a continuous of symmetric Nash equilibrium in mixed strategy, and the payoff maximizing the equilibrium level is about 17.4, which is slightly lower than what we found in the bonus and unsolicited proposal treatment, but it is higher than what we have in both the setting with no bid preferences. This case is the most difficult to be treated with for the theoretical prediction. And what we did some simulation. I do not explain very much about, but from this figure in which we have a simulation with the value of the experiment, we can see that all this part of red area are payoff in which we have higher investment with respect to the area which are below, and in which the maximizing equilibria are larger in this treatment with respect to the one in which there is no bid preference. Now, about stage 2, which is a little bit simpler, what we see that the prediction are affected by what? By the cost of production, which is somehow extracted in between 0 and 555, and by the fact if there is the bid preference or not. So here you have no bid preference, theta equal to 1. Here you have bid preference, theta equal to 1.5. Okay? And what we see this is BIC is the bid for the innovator, and BCC is the bid for the non-innovator. So when you have no bid preference, what do you notice? That they have, the innovator and the competitor, they do have the same equilibrium bid. While when you have the bid preference, innovator and competitor, what do you notice is that the innovator will have always a higher bid with respect to the competitor. What it is relevant to say is that this bid, they do not these bids, they do not depend at all from the investment in innovation in the first stage. Why? Because that is a sunk cost. So you have done, and if you have to pay, you have to pay, but you cannot somehow consider it in the second stage, where we have the competition to award the innovation. Okay. So the expected winning bids are higher under bid preference, and this is what we have seen already here. Okay. Now about theoretical prediction on welfare. So here it is the probability of having the auction revoked or not revoked. In particular, this is the probability of having the auction not revoked. Here is the total welfare. This is the bidder welfare, and this is the supplier welfare. So the total welfare is just the sum of the two, as you can see. And what we can see as a theoretical prediction is that the bid preference increases the buyer, the producer, and the overall welfare. And having a comparison between treatments, we can see that the overall and buyer welfare are higher in the treatment in which you have the bid preference. Okay. Now let's move to the results. And what did I do? I don't know. Okay. I'm safe. Now, okay. Here you can see something which is, to me, very interesting. Here you have the distribution on investment choices by treatments. And you can see that this is the treatment with the bonus and the procurement. This is the treatment with bonus and unsolicited proposal. This is no bonus in both procurement and unsolicited proposal. And what you can see is that there is a single peak in bonus and in unsolicited proposal, which is with respect to these two treatments, these two pictures. And if you remember, in this case, you had only one Nash equilibrium. Okay, so this is exactly somehow referring to that kind of theoretical prediction. So this means that the subject, they understood very well the way in which the experiment went designed, because they are behaving exactly accordingly to theoretical prediction. While you can see that you have two peaks in the procurement with no bonus, and indeed, if you remember, we had the two 0, 12, so you see, close to 0, and this should be close to 12, okay? While you have a large variability in the treatment, the last one which I presented with the bonus and procurement, in which we have mixed strategies, you see? This is the way in which could be the distribution is represented. Now, if you have just a look to the investment choices as a descriptive statistic, and you just refer to the treatment, what you can see is that the bid preferences increases investment. So here you have bid preference in the unsolicited and the bid preference in procurement. And if you compare with the two treatments without, you clearly see that they are higher. And here you have the probability that the investment is equal to 0. Here you have investment over is the investment choice over the total investment and the number of observations. Okay, here you can see the parametric analysis. I just refer to some part of this analysis. You can see that here you have a high significant result with respect to the treatment, and what it does matter here. So this confirms somehow what we already seen with the non-parametric result in the previous slide. What it is relevant here is that the procurement of innovation, so this treatment here, increases the variance of investment, which is this one, you see, with respect to the others, and the probability of investing nothing, which is this one, okay? Why we can say this? Because if you remember in the procurement of innovation, both the competitor and the innovator, they both pay for the investment, okay? While in the unsolicited proposal, only the one which is the investor is going to pay for the cost of investment, okay? So as you can see, this is evident in these results. Here you have the bids in stage 2, and what we found, what we can see here is that bid preferences does not affect the winning bid, and procurement of innovation, especially with bid preference, increases the winning bid. So here you have all the winning bid. So here you have only the winning bid. This is a winning bid minus the random cost which is extracted. Here you have all the bids, and here you have the overall bids when you are considering the investor bids and the competitor bid. And you can see that the difference between, let's have a look to all, but also to the winning bid. You can see that bid preference, so the treatment with the bonus, which is BU and BP, they do not affect a lot the winning bid. So you have to compare with the treatment in which there is not the winning bid. So this is something puzzling. And the parametric analysis somehow confirmed this result, because you can see that here bid preference does not affect at all the results. And what you can see here is, let me check just to go directly to what it is relevant, is the element, yes, about C, okay. So moving back, you can see here that maybe not too much. Yes, this is the cost which is you have to pay to transfer the innovation. And as you can see, it is very significant, so it is affecting the bids. And moreover, if you are an investor, it affects positively your bids, as you can see here. And we are still working on this misbidding, so we want to see why the bid is different, so is not the realized bid is not equal to the theoretical bid, and so we are working on this kind of empirical estimation, but the results are not so clear, so I do not comment on. So again, about bids in stage 2, what we see is that the cost, which is randomly extracted in stage 2, is increasing the bids. If you are an innovator, you will have a higher bid, but this happens even if there is no bid preference, and this is puzzling with respect to the theoretical prediction. And the trend is negatively, but it is not really so relevant. And all the bids are below what the theoretical predicted, but as I told you, we are still working on this result. About efficiency, we have that the bid preference, in particular with respect to the procurement treatment, increases buyers and obviously what is the social surplus, because it is very strong in the part of the buyer surplus. And the procurement of innovation with the bid preference is the best performing treatment for both social and buyer surplus, while the worst is the unsolicited proposal without the bonus. And having the results about surplus, we can see that the bidder surplus is lower than what we theoretically have predicted. And you can see this here, the parametric analysis, but I want just to move to results and the puzzle about sunk cost bias, and then we can discuss somehow, or if you have questions. So we have this summing up, we have these results which somehow are puzzling, because it seems that bid preference does not affect the winning bid, And if you have a procurement of innovation compared with the unsolicited proposal, you have that you will end up with a higher winning bid. And moreover, what is puzzling is that every time you are innovator, you will you will record, considering the innovator, you will record higher bids, and this happen even if there is no bid preference, and the procurer welfare is lower than what we have predicted with the theory. So, what could explain the puzzle which is behind the result? As I told you since the introduction, this is sunk cost bias, which means that somehow in the second stage, bidders, they do not bid just not considering the sunk cost of investment, but including it. How we can show this? Obviously, as John would notice, this is something not really clear to see, but this is the same table I showed before about the research investment, decision, and the bids. And what we did here, we just included, this is the, yes, this is the cost of investment, okay? So you can see here. So we did the same regression, including the cost of investment that the bidders did in the previous stage. And you can see that this is highly significant for all the treatment, and it is also significant when you just interact the treatment with the position of being innovator and this cost which you had in the previous stage. Here you have the probability of winning the auction, considering the cost which is in the second stage, and considering the cost which is in the investment in the first stage. And as we would expect, you have that the cost of the second stage you have to pay just to transfer the innovation will increase. You can see the bids, and being innovator will reduce the probability of winning, in particular in the treatment in which you have procurement and no bonus, and the cost you had in the previous stage about investment reduce the probability in winning both in the procurement under the bonus and non-bonus treatment, while it does not play any effect in the unsolicited proposal. And I just conclude and open the discussion for question, just summing up what we found. So what we wanted to do, we wanted to have an experiment to compare two mechanisms. The procurement of innovation, which is having competition in the first stage, with the unsolicited proposal, which is somehow a random event according to which there is one firm which come in with an innovation. And having these two treatments, what it happens if you give a sort of premium, a sort of bonus in the second stage, which is the stage in which you ask the firm to compete to realize the investment, okay? Which could be done in procurement through this competition, in the unsolicited just as a random event, okay? And what we found that the bid preference increases innovation investment, and it also stimulates social welfare, in particular with respect to the buyer. But what it is really strange is that this bid preference seems not to have a sort of cost for the buyer. Why? Because these bidders, somehow they take into account the investment they did in the first stage, and they suffer a sort of sunk cost bias. We are still thinking how to put in the theoretical prediction this sunk cost bias, so to have a further way to provide empirical test for this kind of evidence we have at this point. And I stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments?
They are dead.
Actually, I have a relaxed timetable today. Why you're sleeping? Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you for a very innovative work on experimental, economic. I really like your presentation. But I have a few comments or clarification.
Yes, please.
Now, let us say that we'll apply this procedure in most of the cases or situations. Like we'll apply for procuring like from this bottle to laptop and every field.
Yeah.
Okay, and now my question here is that if a big firm is there, they will have always the lower cost of cultivation, lower cost for production, for anything. Now in that case, how the small firm or how the startup, which will compete with the big firm? Because the winning of the particular this thing is all depend on how is the cost of production of that. Because since let's say I'm a big firm, I will always give the less bid. Okay, so there is very higher probability of me to getting that. Now, if this happen everywhere, what will be the impact of that on overall welfare? Because it's very difficult for a small firm to compete. That's the one. And second question is that, do you think that there will be underutilization of resources if this happen? That's what my question.
Okay, according to the first, so for the first question, this is a way to make the experiment even more complex because we do not have any elements which refer to the size of the firm. Let's have a look to the real world. We can have small firms, very innovative. So it depends very much on the sector. If you think about the software sector, the software industry, you can have a firm by 2 persons that they come out with a very good application or whatever. So the results with respect to how to foster the innovation according to this mechanism, bid preference and all this stuff, and the results we got, I think they could be applied in setting in which this kind of distinction between small and medium is not so important in terms of cost of production. The other point is that we could also control for this cost, that CP, which is randomly extracted in the second stage. So if that CP is very large, you can think that is the cost of a small firm, and you will see how through the experiment this firm with the high cost will bid. And we found that the higher is this CP and the higher will be the bid. So there is a positive, the positive effect of the production cost on the bid, which is exactly what you are saying, that a small firm with the higher cost will be less competitive. But in this, so there is evidence of this, so just to move to your point, but the experiment cannot say a lot about how to change the bid preference, because it is just for the innovation. So we want to see how this preference affects the innovation in the first stage.
Thank you.
Paola?
Yes? Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I always have this question for experiments. How did you choose the numbers and the exact formula for your experiment, and how to prove the robustness of the results? for other numbers?
Yes, thank you. This is a really good question. When you start thinking about an experiment, first, obviously, it is relevant the idea you have, and the research question. But then, at least in my case, in my experience, you really spend a lot of time in. If you do not have a simple theory, and in this case, you have all this theory about auction and equilibrium bidding strategy and whatever you have seen, the mixed strategy, you have to go towards numerical simulation, and you have to find how some numbers fit better. But fit better means that will provide easier instruction for the subject, because what you want is to have the simplest setting in the lab, so that subject understand the experiment and you have the clean effect of what you are testing. While if you put too many stuff, or there are some noisy in the parameters or whatever, you can have as a result a mess. You spend a lot of money, because you spend money in running experiment, and so it is the worst. So if you think to, for instance, to do an experiment, the best advice I also had is spend a lot of time in doing the design, discuss the design with other experimentalists, then try to find really the good setting for numerical simulation, whatever, and moreover try to do some trials. So, for instance, we did in Padua, before to go in Bocconi, we did in the small lab in Padua with something like 8 students, just 4 couples playing, just to see how it went, and then we changed again the parameters just to have somehow results which could be better with respect to what we want to test. But in any case, that is really a good question and a crucial point. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola, for nice presentations.